In the case of your locals back to 1935, somewhere that a lot of them were created in that time period, is the old CIO. There were threads that said, this is how we protected ourselves. And it has permeated up through time. I suspect that Bill, when Bill led his people from an adversarial process to a cooperative process, or those kind of things, those threads kind of stuck people a little bit. And then the question is, how do I appreciate and recognize that history and those fears by giving them up for a different future? That had to be the transition that you had to go through over and over and over again. And that's why history becomes important, because it helps us make and helps people make that transition. Very, very important. We had a closed shop. Now, in the context of laws today, closed shops are illegal. In the context of 200 years ago, closed shop simply means you want a carpenter, you get him from my local. The family members, we control the craft, that's closed. If you want to make something that's a furniture, you're going to make it with my people. That's it. It ended it. In a modern context, the use of local and state building codes. Let's bring it into today's future, or today and the future. I'd like you to go back and think a little bit about, in your local community, go to the city and look at who populates the zoning board, the board that controls the electrical standards for buildings, all of those standards for building. Look at who's there. They are all, with some few exceptions, craftsmen who were from a local union that practiced a craft. That meant then the standards for building our country were set within the context of the knowledge of my craft, and the standards of that craft were built into the zoning of the laws, and that's normally then could only be met by union craftsmen who were trained to that high level. That was its principle. And I have to laugh because people never look at all those boards until all of a sudden they run into a problem. They say, who the hell are these people? I said, well, they're all members of so-and-so union or so-and-so union. They're craftsmen. And they were put there to enforce a standard, to improve a standard, whatever. Now, you can argue about that and say, well, are the standards still valid today? I'm sure there are places that the standards aren't valid anymore. Maybe we've gone too far. But that doesn't mean I blow the thing up and I shoot them, for God's sakes. I go in and I try to adjust the standards to meet the new training. Remember, training of first opportunity, training of last resort. They relate to laws, they relate to enforcement, they relate to quality. Okay? Now, I want to take my family. The first thing that we learn is that management, owners, are what? They're normally, in those days, were people who, some kid that dad had some money, and this guy couldn't do much, so I bought him a shop. And I bought him a shop to make wheat thrashers. He couldn't do anything. So he had to go to the International Union of Wheat Thrashers and hire. So he comes to you and he says, he's a little bit arrogant, he said, I want to make wheat thrashers. And my journeyman carpenters say, okay, I want 12 journeyman carpenters, 2 apprentices. I don't want any trainees. Well, you don't have that many people in the local, and so you respond back, we're not going to do that for you. And I say back to you, what the hell do you mean you're not going to do that for me? And you tell me, this is how many we have. We're not going to devote our whole local to your business. We will give you 1 journeyman carpenter. We'll give you 2 apprentices. That's it. You'll have to produce with that crew. So I go back and I'm thinking about this and I'm brooding about it as a business owner, and it doesn't make me feel good. So the next thing I start thinking about is the quality of the product and the quantity. And I decide, I don't care if it's rough and has wooden spikes that get in my hand. You tell me, as the union leader and a craftsman, no, we are going to sand them. I say, well, it costs me money. I don't want sanded. You said, you don't have any choice. We determine, as the union, the quality. Why? Because it represents what we stand for. Now, if you come through time and translate that, what that simply means is we have three definitions of quality in this world. We have the craftsperson's definition, based upon the training and education and all the things that are there. You have the owner's definition of quality, based upon pricing and profitability and whatever. And then you have the consumer's definition of quality. And that consumer may have a different definition than your two definitions. So I'm really now not feeling too good, because I'm going to have these smooth wheat thrashers, and I think very frankly you could lose control of them and hit somebody with it. I want to produce 35,000 of those things a year. My journeyman carpenter said we will make 4,000 a year. Now, I don't have any choice. If I'm going to make them, I've got to use my craft. There's no other substitute. So I guess that's it. But you know, I want to determine the material. I want to, in effect, make these wheat thrashers out of walnut. My craftsman said, no, we're going to make them out of, what's this wood? It's a southern wood. Hickory. Yep, it's hickory. I want to make them out of hickory. Now, hickory costs money, and we've got to bring the wood from someplace, and we don't grow hickory trees in Los Angeles. We do grow them somewhere out in the east, and we grow them somewhere around Detroit. What the hell are we going to do? We determine, if you will, the material. Now, what about design? As an owner, and I want you to think about it in the current sense, as an owner, I want to have fancy little things on the handle. And you people tell me, and I said, actually what I'd like to do is I'd like to have a gargoyle head right on the end of this sucker. And you look at me, I think we got more gargoyles in Boston than we do in Los Angeles, to my knowledge anyway. And she tells me, well, or he tells me, I'm not going to do gargoyles, I'm going to do roses. I like roses. Or I'll do coconuts. One of the two. Got your choice. I don't want a coconut. You don't have any choice. Scarcity determines. What methods are we going to use? Now, knowing that we use hickory, what's the methodology that the craft is going to use to produce what we've determined? I try to dictate some kind of process and line and whatever, and you say, no, we will do it our way, the way we were trained. What this, and I thought about this, Bill, when you're thinking about in the modern times of cooperation, all of that, how many unions today determine the quality, quantity, materials, designs, and methods of either the service or the product that they develop? We don't. That was the power source for the union movement in terms of getting the job done. Okay, I'd like you to flip a page in your manual. And when I think about that's not in my job description, where did that come from? It came from here. Long, long time ago. Why? Because it was important. It was important because I, as a union, and as a craft, and as a skill, I determined these parameters. And as long as I did, and there was no one else outside of my organization to meet it, then I had a controlling power. Where was management? Ownership versus managing. There wasn't management. There was ownership, but it was ownership through money. That's something, unless the craft itself, and that happened too, that the craft created their own organizations. Sometimes when they, which is down at the bottom there, they just simply walked away from me, and you formed your own company. You made your own wheat thrashers by your own standards. In the beginning, there were no labor agreements. Why did I need a labor agreement? That was my labor agreement. Why do I need a labor agreement setting forth terms and conditions of employment which are enforceable in a court of law when I could enforce any damn thing I wanted within the scarcity of my hands? As we pass through time and scarcity started to leave me, the contract started to appear. This is the first of them. Kind of not much of one, considering the Ford contracts are that thick now. Well, they got a little smaller here recently, but that's what it looked like. And then it kept growing through time. In modern days, we had big contracts, lots of things, all kinds of terms and conditions. Hell, nobody knows what the hell's in here. One thing I always tell about people, and and I'll offer it to you also. I'll take your contract, you underline all the words and phrases you don't know what they mean, and if you got more than 100, don't lie, more than 100, you buy me supper somewhere in Detroit of my choosing. I will go to Ann Arbor. If you have less than 100, I'll buy your supper anywhere you want to go in Detroit. Now why? The contracts are not perfect and exact. They're built out of a lot of words that are, if you will, suppose this, how about that, whatever. Practice and history becomes important because that's what defines these. So the bigger they got, and that's why they probably, with Bill's situation and Mike's, they probably got to a point where, how did we get by all of this? I can't abandon it, and so I have to create an alternative world to try to work together within this, for God's sakes, to make it work again. Otherwise, and I'm sure within certain company managements and even some memberships, it was still, this is our Bible. And that's important to those people. But how do we get them through it so that we both prosper? And then we started reversing ourselves. This is the compact. This is the one between your union and Dayton Power and Light. It started with this, ended up with a big contract. It came down to this. And I'll let you guys take a look at this at your leisure. So God, when leadership makes decisions, you know, you don't know for sure where to go. You do the best you can. There are consequences for it. And that's all right. I have no problem. As long as I have one eye that points back and one eye that points forward, then I can feel somewhat confident I can see where we're going. So there were no labor contracts in those days because I didn't need it. Take a look on page 12 if you move over. The craft union made its bargain in the form of wage levels. If you look until recent times at the building trades, you still see that there. When they went into negotiations, they negotiated, it's changed a bit, but they negotiated a wage level amount of money, and then it was distributed into health and welfare funds, jointly administered or administered by the union or whatever. There were no real fringe benefits before 1950. Health insurance, as you will, never existed before the 50s. It didn't exist. The note to myself is the union took care of its own, the family. That's why I said to Ty, change your habit or we won't take care of you. And so part of the monies that came in to the craftsmen and the journeymen and the apprentices and the trainees went into taking care of the union member, i.e. the family, passed down through time.